Welcome to this week's episode of Whiskey Neat, spirited conversations with interesting people. I'm your host, Kristopher Hart. And this week, we sit down with Steve Stanley, which he's been here a couple times, I think, but behind the camera. Steve is with Beam Suntory. Beam has been on the show a few times. We've had Bill Samuels from Makers, legend in the industry. Fred Noe from Beam, legend in the industry. And today we have another legend of the industry, and that's Kathleen DiBenedetto. Kathleen is the fourth or fifth woman ever inducted into the Bourbon Hall of Fame, and has been the reason she was the person slinging the small batch series from Beam back in '92 when it first came out. You're talking about your Knob Creeks, your Bookers, your Bakers. Actually, Bookers came out before that. But Basil Hayden's, the whole 9 yards. Kathleen is a utter legend and has been working with Beam for a very long time. So it was an honor to have her on the show. This week's episode, as always, is sponsored by our loving folks over at Highland Park and McAllen, the McAllen. We have a new sponsor coming up next week. Our next episode is the episode with TJ Miller. So by the time you're watching this, you're 1 week away from a couple of new sponsors and, of course, the ever hilarious TJ Miller. Super excited about that. When will this air? This week or next week? Next week. Yeah. So So next week it'll air. The Whiskey Social will be happening this week, so this will air on Friday. That means the Whiskey Social is tomorrow. Get your tickets today for the Houston Whiskey Social at HoustonWhiskeySocial.com. We're looking at 1,000 plus people, 400 plus spirits, wine, whiskey, the whole 9 yards, and it's just Houston's big event. It's a great sampling event. You can try stuff. You can buy stuff. It's everything you've ever wanted to do getting into whiskey. Are you coming, by the way?
Yeah.
Yeah? Did you go last year?
I did not.
No.
Last year. But I'm bringing friends this year.
You better come this year. So every year it gets bigger. Every year it gets crazier. It is awesome. So without further ado, Kathleen DiBenedetto and Steve Stanley from Beam Bourbon. Cheers. Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thanks.
I love the formal introductions. Although I know Steve, I've known Steve for a couple years now.
Yeah.
Let's start. Where do we start? I could use a drink.
Well, I thought we
Houston's smoggy right now. I don't know if you heard the whole thing. We're on fire.
I took a picture of the fire and I sent it home to Chicago.
It's crazy.
Because I couldn't believe it. I thought there was storm clouds coming in, and Steve said, "No, it's a fire.
Yeah, it's a fire.
That's smoke. It's not storm."
What's weird too is my mother was like, we should evacuate. I said, what do you mean evacuate? Look up. The entire city's covered. When it finally rains, we're going to lose a lot of vegetal matter, like trees, grass. Something's going to happen.
Well, wait a minute. It may all start growing really pretty. You never know.
Yeah.
Who knows what's in that?
Maybe the opposite.
It could be mutantly large.
Yeah.
So we're going to start off with Basil Hayden.
Sure.
So Basil Hayden is one of the original small batch bourbons. And
a direct reference to Old Granddad?
It is a direct reference. This is Old Granddad. He was a gentleman who moved from the East, Pennsylvania, Virginia. He made rye whiskey out there and then moved west to Kentucky. Now, oddly enough, he started the Catholic Church in Kentucky, which I thought was interesting. It's one of the largest Catholic settlements, especially Bardstown has the one basilica. St. Joe's, I believe.
Wow.
So let's start with a little bit of that.
This is actually, and I kind of mentioned this briefly before we started recording, but
yes.
Basil Hayden's is a great introduction for most people into the would you say luxury bourbon category? I mean, it's definitely got the look for it, but when I first got into whiskey, Basil was like the first thing I kind of like, okay, this looks nice, it's gorgeous, interesting label.
You know, it's interesting that you say luxury bourbon because I worked on this business from 1992 on. And when we first introduced this, it was the 90s. And it was the age of vodka.
Sure.
Remember the world's best tasting vodka, right?
Earlier, the mid-2000s is like where it just fell apart completely, which
I know.
People keep talking about bourbon hitting a boom. I don't think we're heading in that direction. We've got a great foundation. Bourbon in general, I think, is very well grounded and not a bubble the way vodka was. Vodka is just crazy the way that it got. Donut flavored this and spicy that.
Oh, it was crazy. But at the time, this whiskey was very difficult to sell because of the shape of the bottle. It was a wine bottle. And we take it into research, and people would say, that's rot gut. That's what I would put in a paper bag.
Oh, because they thought it was cheaper.
It did not fit their vision of what luxury
bourbon
was.
Yeah.
And Booker was the kind of guy who didn't care what people thought. I mean, you probably got that sense from Fred.
Oh, yeah. Fred could give two nothings.
Honestly, so the idea is that Booker started bottling in wine bottles because this was the bottle he could get for the best price. And he was all about value.
Oh, dude, the Booker's bottle's gorgeous. I think it's always been gorgeous.
This was another difficult bottle in research. People would say, it's wine bottle. It's like a wino would drink that stuff. And it wasn't until... And Booker loved that because it took somebody who knew what they were talking about to like it at that time. I mean, this was a horrible time. Now, tell me about your background in bourbon so I know when I'm understanding.
I got into Scotch about 10 years ago with my wife.
Cool.
Through the people on the show have heard this story, but my father-in-law was not very privy. He didn't like me very much. But I knew he was a Scotch drinker. We weren't married at the time. We were just dating.
Of course.
So I get it. And I've got 3 daughters. I'm right there. But so I bought a bottle of Scotch to kind of, and believe it or not, it was a bean product. It was Lefroy. Lefroy was the first ever. I didn't know that there was peated, unpeated. So.
Wow, that's a tough one to start with.
He throw you out of the house?
I threw because
no, he probably invited you in.
Either one, yeah.
This was at Christmas. I always forget if it's Christmas or Thanksgiving because it became a tradition.
Yeah.
Every Thanksgiving and every Christmas, we'd get the family together, and all the men would get together, have cigars and Lefroy.
Oh, yeah.
So it's something that we still try to make happen at least once a year, and that was my start. I felt bourbon was very boring. It was like a very narrow flavor profile versus Scotch where you can go sherry and this and that. And so I started getting into bourbon, and I started going to these whiskey festivals. So then I started my own whiskey festival and the Houston Whiskey Social, which is next Saturday. And
wonderful.
We have the Houston Bourbon Society, which can be a hot mess as well. It's 5,400 members now. We see about 80 new people a week, and we started buying barrels and it just became this obsession. Anyone that's ever gotten into this hobby, you find yourself jumping in feet first pretty quickly, right? So
I love that.
I am huge fans of you guys. We bought our first barrel from you guys. It was a Knob Creek. So our festival, one of the things that's different about our festival is we buy a barrel of bourbon every year for it. And that may happen in other states, but it doesn't happen in Texas.
Yeah.
So our first one was a barrel of Knob Creek. Last year we did a barrel of Four Roses. This year and then our group itself buys about 30 barrels a year. So it's become this
awesome.
Local. Houston's doing very very well in terms of, and we've got we took a Knob Creek barrel that we did a pick on, filled it full of beer, and aged it, and now it's going to come out recently. It's coming out in 2 weeks. We did a beer release. It's coming out in 2 weeks, and it's Knob Creek 1792 and Russell's Barrels. Barrel-aged stout with coconut and vanilla bean, and it's killer. So we're huge fans. So having you on the show, he called me. He said, "Hey, would you be interested?" I was like, "Oh, I know who she is. yeah, I know who she is."
First thing he said.
Yeah. I very much would love to have you on the show.
I got Kathleen's batch, is what he said.
Oh well, no, I'm glad to be here. Here's to you, my friend.
Here's
to you.
Thanks for coming,
Steve. Thank you.
You, Kathleen.
Steve,
thanks for coming down.
If anyone's paying attention, we've had 3 NASA employees on the show and 2 Bourbon Hall of Famers. So I'll take it.
Really? Awesome. So,
that's true.
Tell me about your barrel experience. I've always found it interesting. I mean, I did this with Booker's where I was able to somewhat select.
Sure.
Because there is a panel that truly selects in the end.
Sure.
I can sway it in my direction if I'm pleasant enough. But when you bought your Knob Creek barrel, how many barrels did you go through until you found the one you wanted?
Good question. So the first one we did in market at a restaurant. We did 3 or 4 samples.
Okay.
And I think we've rejected 2 batches of samples a couple times and got new ones in. but we've also participated in other stores. So since our group has grown, not only are we doing our own barrels, but now we have stores who see that
the value.
So they've started doing their own barrels, and so you have not just NASA, you've got the Blind Pig, Flax Liquor. All these stores are starting to just snatch up barrels left and right.
That's awesome.
Because they're so fun, they're so unique, they're so interesting, and you guys send in this beautiful wooden box that weighs 50 pounds, and
it is an awesome pack.
Yeah, it's an awesome pack, and I've talked about this on the show. One of my favorite parts about the experience is just having these little samples of these unique one-off barrels.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't get that barrel, you've got a little treat from it, right?
Yeah.
A little taste
Little
treat.
100 ml.
Yeah.
I find it always interesting that people they go through the process and they select what they want, and then they realize at the end of the day there's only 10 cases. There's 5 cases in that barrel or whatever.
Oh yeah, we had one of those,
and that's so disappointing in some levels, but it's so rare in others.
We did a barrel that had 72 bottles in it, and we needed 100 for the event. So we were kind of like, oh crap. So,
but I still think it's the rarity.
Then
you know it's the real thing, right?
Sure.
You can't fake that, right?
Well, and look what it all came from. I mean, like you said, 92. You guys released the line, and it's been the one thing. Can I ask this isn't a critical note, but
sure.
Why is Baker's not talked about as much? It seems like everything's got a focus except Baker's, and it's good.
Baker's is a wonderful whiskey, and when I did those, I don't know if you're probably still like super young, so you probably weren't around
17.
in the 90s.
Yeah.
So so you just turned 21, so I understand this. But in the 90s, we had these Kentucky Bourbon Circle tastings, and every time at the end of the tasting, we'd ask, "What's your favorite whiskey?" And we'd go by brand, and Baker's was always one of the top winners, and I don't understand why it never took off the way it should have.
Well, there's not a lot of, and the way I understand things, I just realized my laptop's still on. The way I understand things is a lot of times the marketing departments will have like a focus item. You guys put a lot of thought behind the Knob Creek branding. The Baker's not Baker's, but Booker's has gotten a lot of revamping, and there's been no revamping of Baker's, right? I mean, it's been pretty much.
But just so you know, the small batch had no funding. We did this on our own. It was a labor of love that Booker loved.
Oh, it was awesome. Yeah. And
so it wasn't like we said, we want to make Knob Creek the king. Knob Creek took off on its own. We don't know why it did. We just know that we believe it was the shape of the...
and it's a great bottle.
It was the great shape of the package. I think that helped at the time because in the 90s, mid-90s, it was 96 when it started going up. And they're like, okay, well, you need to do more of what you're doing on Knob Creek. I'm like, I'm not doing anything on Knob Creek. We're doing tastings.
Because back then you were a rep, right? You were preaching the good word across the country.
I was half and half. I worked marketing half, and the other half I had to sell. Because Booker felt that if you worked on his business, you needed to know what it was like, not only how the people experience the brands in Kentucky, whether it's how you make it, but how people experience the brands in the field. He's very much a purist, and you probably got that out of Fred as well. They are not. They believe in keeping things simple.
Oh yeah, I was about to say very simple.
Very simple.
I hate to say simple-minded. That's not what I mean, but just
kind
of like it's and things don't overcomplicate things.
Right. And be truthful. And so I would tell you, all of these took off on their own. And when Baker's won, I think it was International Wine and Spirits Festival. Baker's won Whiskey of the Year. It was maybe mid-2000s. Maybe it was closer to 2010 or something. I'm like, yes, this brand is that good. Now, we had changed the package once. We added wax on the neck. Mm-hmm. If you saw the original Baker's, it was a label that was this color that just had Baker's on it. It was very, very simple, plain, and we realized that was a problem. So we changed the package once. That didn't change it. I think they're looking at doing something new with Baker's in an effort.
I don't even remember the price. What's the price point on Baker's? It's been a while.
It's a little bit above. You're going to have to answer that one, Steve, because
I'm
from
Chicago.
Yeah,
it's going to be around the $40 range.
Yeah, I mean, and you're talking, and what's the proof on it? It's above
107.
107, right? Yeah,
I mean, think about other 107s that are very well known and popular. Buffalo Traces, Baker's for $45, 107 proof. Like,
yeah,
I don't understand why it's not you guys, well, maybe incorporate it in your barrel program. Maybe that would revive the brand.
You know what? That is a great idea. And
if you guys offered a 107 proof pick of Baker's, you heard it here first. If it happens, they took my idea.
But I will tell you, we make 7 years in advance, or 7 to 9 to 12 years in advance. And so a lot of the reason why maybe Baker's hasn't taken off as much as maybe we wanted it to is we didn't plan for that.
Sure.
You watch the trajectory of brands and you start putting away what you need to put away, what you think you need to put away, and you hope to God you got it right. In this case, we didn't always get it right on Knob Creek. We went out of stock twice. Hopefully we're not out of stock now.
Well, not right now.
You guys are killing it right now too, though. You guys are doing over 1,000 barrels a year in the barrel program.
Which
That's
is crazy. It's
yeah.
crazy, but I mean, when we worked on the brand, I would sit in meetings and they'd say, Kathleen, are you going to make your number this year? And I never, ever made my number.
Sure.
And so it's wonderful to see that it's doing well. Booker's, I think we have an issue with now because these all are distilled at different proofs. And
an issue with overselling or underselling?
I mean, we don't have enough.
Oh, sure.
Because everything is distilled to proof. No water can ever be added to Booker's.
Sure.
So, and that is a hard and fast rule. It's filtered through a mesh screen, and sometimes you can lift up the bottle, and you'll see what's called mare's tail. You know, the horse.
Highland Haze. Yeah, you'll see the
char.
Yeah,
the char will just go inside, and Booker would always look for those, and then he'd always.
He liked it.
Oh, he loved it.
Yeah.
Because then he knew it was real. He knew it was whiskey, the style of pre-prohibition style.
Yeah, straight from the barrel.
And then he'd always check the proof by checking the bead. If the bead went away quickly, it was high proof. You know, the bubbles at the bottom. If they held, it was bottled in bond. See how this held?
Sure.
And that did not hold. And then you could tell the lower proof as well. This is open. Let's not do that, Kath.
Well, yeah.
I don't know if it's going to react the same because this is not a bourbon.
Yeah.
But so it's interesting.
Sure.
The way he would
those
always
old school
show
tricks, yeah.
Oh, but he would always do that. He'd sit in tastings, and everyone could be having a conversation. He'd just sit there behind the desk and go.
Just looking at it. I tell you this much: the nose on that basil is classic, great bourbon. Like I give it a little hard time for the 80 proof thing, but I think you were going to elaborate more on the choice to make it all 80 proof for every Basil Hayden's. But the nose on it is incredible. Such a huge fan of. I mean, I can't tell you how I think Knob Creek. So. I do a lot of things around the city, but one of the things I do is I'll do private tastings for people.
I love
Someone
that.
will say, hey, we want to have a bourbon tasting at this conference or whatever. And I always incorporate, there's certain brands you always have to incorporate. Mm-hmm. If you don't incorporate Knob Creek, the 120 proof or even the 100 proof at a tasting, their perception of a lot of these guys, like I'd say the average consumer, maybe a little less than the average consumer, they don't know what bourbon is until you put Knob Creek in a glass. And I'm not trying to blow smoke up your butts, but I absolutely love Knob Creek. And I think the 120 proof is just such a classic example of what Kentucky bourbon. Yeah, it's big. It's a classic Kentucky bourbon. Like it's only been around, we're coming up on 30 years almost. Yep. 28
years, baby.
Yeah.
It's 28 years since I started.
It's been around and the label designs, you guys keep changing it.
This is the first time we've changed it.
Brand new.
Well, no, I thought you guys have changed it several times because it used to have it used to have an age statement on it.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, but an overhaul of the
a complete redesign. Yeah.
Right.
No,
I mean, the old
I like this. It's got kind of a paper medicinal look. Like an old medicine bottle.
When I sit at my desk and I am having a rough day,
You're doing it wrong. You're supposed to drink it. You've had a rough day.
Well, you can't drink it.
When I have a rough day, I don't smell things. I drink things.
No, but you know what it does? And I don't know if you get this way. Like if you just pick this up and you smell it, it takes you there. Mm-hmm. It takes you to a place mentally where you are able to relax.
Reminds me of the Rick House.
Yes.
Exactly.
When I smell bourbon, it reminds me of the Rick House.
Every time I smell Knob or Booker's, if I close my eyes, I am back. I am back in the Rick House. Exactly. Tasting barrels. That's what that is.
Well, there's that moisture in the air, that mash, that grain you smell.
Cheers.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheers. I know we've kind of jumped all over, so let's do this.
Let's go back.
Yeah, let's back up. Let's talk about let's finish Basil Hayden's, and then I want to talk about this redesign.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I finished that a little bit so I could have some.
Yeah, I'll take a little touch more. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm used to pouring a quarter ounce. This is what we do.
Sure.
Okay, so Basil Hayden's, the whole premise for this small batch collection was the idea that we wanted to have whiskey the way it used to be, the way it was meant to be. And it was representative of different recipes and different styles. And obviously Basil Hayden's was named for the original Mr. Old Granddad, Mr. Basil Hayden, who came over from Maryland, Pennsylvania. That area was undefined as such. And he made whiskey with a higher percentage of rye. Now, the choice to come in at 80 proof on this was simply a decision.
Sure.
It wasn't based in historical fact, where Knob Creek, the whole idea of 100 proof really was based in this, early 20th century style of bottled and bond, although this is not bottled and bond. This is not from the same season. So we have a mixture of different ages in here. So we can't call it bottled and bond. Someday I hope we can. I really would like to see a bottled and bond for Knob Creek. I think bottled bond is special. But Basil Hayden was really the accessible whiskey. It was the whiskey that was going to be for, and I don't mean to say this, do not judge me, but the bourbon virgin, those who are new to bourbon.
No judgment here, first of all.
And if you like Canadian whiskey,
sure,
this was the brand that you could most easily get into.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
And so when we do the tastings, again, back in the 90s, we would say Baker's was the cognac style because it had this beautiful round taste on your tongue. It was very viscous,
yeah.
Yeah, and it felt different. It felt like ice cream with fat versus ice cream that is fat-free. It just rolled differently, and I loved that. Where Basil Hayden was very light and easy. And so he said, if you're just stepping into bourbon, this was the easiest way
it's the front
to
door,
get it.
Right?
But yet,
it's a good way to put it. Front door.
Still is extra aged, so you still have the caramel, you have the vanilla.
Oh yeah, like I said, it smells incredible. I mean, if you're trying to, I like. Sorry to interrupt you.
No,
I like to. If you're giving someone, let's say, a flight of what Beam has to offer, and you go through, and you always do low proof to high proof. You work your way up. You know, if you do the Basil Hayden's, the Knob Creek, the Bakers, then the Bookers, you've got the spectrum of mouthfeel, spectrum of flavor.
Yes.
It's the front door versus the atrium versus the living room versus the bedroom.
I love it. Yeah, the jammies. You mean the bourbon that you wear your jammies?
Yeah, the bedside bottle. I mean, it's you're watching TV at home. You know, you catch it up on the latest Netflix documentary, and you look over and you've got this bold, high proof beast. And I'm with you there. And you guys have kind of. Not only, I wouldn't say that you've redesigned the packaging, it's more like you've added more to the Basil's portfolio.
Yeah, so we have experimented more with Basil Hayden's than perhaps we have the other brands because it has lent itself that way. The other element that we've brought into this is Fred No's son, Little Fred, who is known as Fred No as well. Sure. It's hard. So I call him Little Fred, and then there's Big Fred.
Does anyone call him Freddie or just Little Fred?
I think his father calls him Freddie, but I think Fred is Freddie wants to be known as Fred.
Sure,
as he should.
Yeah, you're a big boy.
Yeah. He's like, I'm going to be 30. I should be called Fred.
My little brother, his name is Jay. We've always called him JJ, and he doesn't. Now that he's an adult, he's like, call me Jay. I'm like,
oh, he says it to you.
I'm like, all right, JJ.
Yeah. Well, so the thing that has added value is Little Fred has an extraordinary nose, and if you ever have him on here. He is literally our Global Innovation Center. He worked there for shifts as he's training to be master distiller. Sure. They could not believe his nose. In fact, they thought it couldn't be true. They thought he might be cheating.
Sure.
Looking at some of the brands, he could tell different brands by just smelling, and it was extraordinary. And so he has this talent, like Booker does, with blending. So he has a lot of fun looking at what the future of bourbon could be, or the future of American whiskey. I wouldn't say bourbon because we brought in American whiskey here.
Sure.
So actually it's a North American whiskey. I can't say it's American because we include some Canadian now.
Sure.
So
can I see that bottle?
Yeah, sure.
Is this similar to your Alberta dark batch? Or is it a
it
similar
includes
process?
Some Alberta dark batch. So they started with the rye least 51% rye, American straight rye whiskey.
Sure.
Then we added in a bit of the Alberta whiskey, which is 100% rye. It is one of the only a few. Oh, I think we are the only distiller of 100% rye. And then we add a bit of port. So as you know, with Canadian whiskey, you can add up to 9% of flavor on the back end. And we've chosen to use port.
And I had someone taste this. I don't think I've had this yet.
You got to try it.
But I remember, I've always been a fan of the dark batch.
Yes.
To me, it reminds me of like a biscuity yeast roll, like a dinner roll.
Yeah.
And that's got a little dash of Old Granddad in it too, right?
Yeah,
I think 4% or something.
Yes, it does. It has a little bit of, what is it, $9.99 or
That's
something.
another brand that I think is kind of quiet. Like a lot of people aren't. Is it gone? It's not like, oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like these little gems.
What's it called in Canada? Dark Horse.
Dark Horse. It's called Dark Horse. And it does very well up in Canada.
Yeah, Canada's huge.
But it's hard.
Canadian
whiskey in the U.S. is really a hard category. And
I'll tell you why.
We're not ready.
Yeah, historically, and I've said this on the show a few times about Armagnac and about Canadian it's historically been kind of a boring category, whether it's the constant cut and proof or just no innovation, no changing. And now you're seeing a lot of brands innovate and change and blend and this and that. Yeah. I mean, can we talk a little bit about Legion today when we get a chance?
Sure.
Yeah, but it's just now you're seeing this awakening in the American bourbon drinker. And as well, almost all the producers are putting a ton of effort behind just seeing what you can do. And so there's a lot of brands I think were before their time. Dark Batch, I think, was a little before its time. And it was right before what we are now, because I think it came out like 5 years ago or something.
Yeah, it was a while
Probably
ago.
was about 5 years, yeah.
And things are much different now than they were 5 years ago. And it's something that I always thought for, I think I paid $28.
Yeah, it was around $30.
Yeah, it's freaking
solid
solid whiskey.
Yeah.
So the darker one, that is the dark rye. And so I hope you like it. I do think it adds a new level of complexity.
If I don't, can we still be friends?
I'll drink it. It's okay. Because not everything is going to appeal to everyone. And we were talking about that earlier in that I appreciate Lafroig, but I can't say it's something that's my go-to cocktail. But I love the history. When I taste it, the 2,000 years worth of history. I'm tasting the ground that William Wallace walked on.
It's crazy that you'd even say that. I've talked about that when it comes to peated whiskey, it takes thousands of years to what you're tasting in your glass because it takes so long for peat to develop. It's such a historical, and it's a unique thing. You can't have it always. I totally get it.
Yeah.
This is 80 proof.
80 proof.
It kind of drinks a little higher proof. I get a little spice in there.
I think it's because you've got a good percentage of 100% rye whiskey in there. And if you know rye whiskey, that finish is an intense finish. It is something that you have to work towards. Now, I do think the port has added another dimension. Now, whether you like that sweetness.
Biscuity notes. Those biscuit notes.
I'm going to pour myself.
Yeah.
I just want to try it. I'm so sorry. I didn't finish this one.
We've got an empty one here.
Yeah, pour it in there. I was going to say, you can dump it all in here if you want to.
No, you got to keep drinking. Oh, and you are not going to be mixing it.
No, I'm good.
He's a master blender.
Honestly, we bring front on here and do a little blending.
There was actually an experiment that was done last night. So we had a local guy who's a bit of a controversial character.
Okay.
But he had an idea of trying to recreate finished whiskeys on a smaller scale directly in the bottle and see if he could do it for cheaper than what the producers do it for.
Sure.
And then blind test everyone. So he invited a bunch of people over last night, and we tasted, 2 samples. One sample is a commercial offering, unadulterated, or it's already finished. And the other one is his taking a regular Kentucky bourbon and then adding a little whatever it is. So if it wants a port or I think he did a port finish, a brandy finish, and a curacao, which is just really bizarre.
Yeah.
But the first one was Angel's Envy versus his Old Granddad with a little port added to it.
So tell me what happened.
It won. So
are you serious?
Yeah. So
But you can't compare. I mean, Angel's Envy's recipe is so very different than Old Granddad.
Night and day.
Sure.
But that said, I think that's a cool experiment.
It's a cool little
Everybody
thing to kind of
should look at
see,
that.
and if anything, it gets a bunch of people around a table just to talk and understand things a little better. So
I love that.
it was fun. I don't know what his cost. We didn't get cost info. We were just blind taste testing, but
I love this. So
I like it too.
I asked Steve to bring.
It reminds
this
me of
along.
an after dinner pour,
Doesn't it? Yeah,
like a
it
little
is.
digestive.
But
It
it's
is
something that
delicious
I
to
can
me.
sip straight. And we talked about this earlier as well. Like the Bookers, I'll put it on ice. I want it on a lot of ice, and I want to just let it sit. But this, I want to drink it straight.
What'd you call the tail thing?
Mare's tail,
Mare's tail? I've never heard that.
like the horse's tail.
Sure.
It's a Booker thing.
Well, it's
Bookerism.
Bookerism.
when you throw ice in a Booker's, you see the the way it melts and marries the oils blend, and
Oh, I love
that's
that.
what I think
That
of,
is
yeah.
so cool.
Yeah.
It is nice, but then it makes me sad that I realize I'm
Busting it up.
busting it up.
Oh, listen, you drink how
but
you
you know
like.
what?
Screw all the snobs.
Amen.
From your mouth to God's
Yeah.
ears.
I
That,
like
that
that.
is an evolved man, isn't it?
Drink what you like.
All right. So
So now
that's our Basil Hayden. So that Basil Hayden we just did come out with one that I want you to try when you have a chance.
the
And I don't know if it's
2x2
here.
is that what it's called?
No, the 10-year. Did you get the 10-year?
The black's a 10-year,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
The 10 years is extraordinary.
Now, if you remember, there's been a lot of marketing decisions one way with
Yeah.
Beam over the last couple of years, and then maybe a retraction and a change here and there depending on the decision.
Yeah.
I think there were rumors of them discontinuing something and making it a cash strength basil offering. Do you remember that? There was something, and it's blanking me at the moment. There was something that you guys made.
To make it a cask strength.
The rumor was you were going to and people are probably screaming at their radios right now, but there was something that you guys had made that was so good and well loved, and I think that maybe it was Baker's. Maybe something about you guys. Oh, got it. It's Old Granddad 114. The rumor was you were going to stop making Old Granddad 114 and instead bottle a cash strength version of Basil Hayden's. Has that ever been talked about, or is that just the internet going nuts?
No, I don't know. I know we're still making 114.
Yeah, and it was awesome.
I mean, honestly, I worked on that brand way back in the day. And
I think what it was, we were out of 114 for a while. Probably.
People panicked.
And I think people panicked and then rumors started, and that's where probably got started. We were out for a while because of the juice. We needed the juice for Old Granddad. We needed the juice for
the juice,
basil.
not the Jews. Just
the
clever.
juice.
Yeah.
Juice. Did I say juice? The juice.
No,
we need all the juice.
I think that was the rumor, is that you guys were going to do away with Old Granddad 114 and instead do a cash strength version of Basil's. But
it wouldn't. We've done so many different things with basil, but I haven't heard that.
I think that could start at some point, but people don't realize the strength of the old Overholts, the old Granddads.
Oh, really?
And from somebody
on fire.
For somebody who's worked in the field,
awesome. Yeah. Just a solid pour.
Honestly,
how old is it? Do we know? It's a blend of.
I'm not sure. You may be.
Old Granddad.
Yeah.
Old Granddad used to be one of the oldest whiskeys on the shelf when I started working on it.
Sure.
It was a 6-year-old. I do not believe it's a 6-year-old anymore. I believe it's between a 4 and a 5-year-old. But it was a 6-year-old in the 90s.
Yeah.
When we couldn't sell enough whiskey. I mean, we had so much whiskey.
Sure.
Right? But the good thing that's happening with the olds, like Old Overholt, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So we're actually, I don't know if I can say this.
Go for it.
No one listens.
Yes. And this time everyone's going to listen and I'm going to get fired. But we've hired somebody who's going to work together with the Overholt Foundation in Pennsylvania to start to create whiskeys made from those heirloom rye.
Oh, sure.
So it'll be the true...
I'm not as well versed on ryes, but is this the Monongahela?
Monongahela.
Is that what it is? Yeah.
Yes. And I went on if you ever have the chance, and we have to do this at some point, you have to do the Whiskey Rebellion tour. So a gentleman by the name of Bradford Lawrence, who now runs the old Overholt brand, does a Whiskey Rebellion tour, and you start off in Pittsburgh, and you go south of the city, and you start at the first town, or you start where the first shot was fired for the Whiskey Rebellion, and you take the tour to the different towns where the rebellion took you, and you go to the lawyer's house. And
sure.
It is the most extraordinary thing. You end up at the Old Overholt Museum, where you learn about Henry Frick, who was his son-in-law, who ended up running the steel with Rockefeller.
I think it was.
Sure.
So it is the most extraordinary time of our history. This whole whiskey rebellion
All
and
of the whiskey, everything in the whiskey world. The
but you think
history
it's
is what's so fascinating.
It's so rich
to
about
me.
it, yeah.
So rich.
But you think it's just Kentucky, but we forget there's this
everywhere.
other side in Pennsylvania and in Maryland where the Calverts were, the Lord Calvert distillery. So I have all the archives from the national distillers. And there's pictures of the distilleries from pre-Prohibition. And there was one right there in Maryland, the national distillers where we made, I think it was, my Lord, it wasn't Old Granddad, Spring Hiller, I forget the name.
Sure.
But there was all these brands that we have, like Old Granddad, we can trace the first trademark to 1832. It's incredible. Now the Beams, they aren't real good at paying taxes. So let's just say maybe we didn't have a lot of trademarks until after 1900.
Sure.
Where National Distillers, they were incorporated a long time ago in Old Overholt, and even Knob Creek, the first brand on Knob Creek was out before pre-Prohibition.
Oh, I didn't know
That brand name was owned by us. Mount Vernon, which is now George Washington's home, is a brand name that's owned by National Distillers, now owned by Beam, which is cool. I just hope someday we have a chance to taste those whiskeys that are being aged right there.
Doing it now?
So, all the distillers are mixing their spirits. As I understand it, it's like a blend. And at one point, the first year that they did something at Mount Vernon, we did a special package for them. But the fact is, it's an industry thing, and I think we should, as an industry,
come together more often.
Come together and do more
you.
stuff together. Because there's space for everybody. Let's all enjoy
that's
this
what
moment.
Legion's about, right? Is coming together.
That's exactly right.
East and West.
It's when you bring Japan together with Kentucky. And honestly, that's never been done before. And it only could happen with Fred, because he's the kind of guy who's naturally curious. He wants to know how Shinji does what he does. And if you know Shinji Fukuyu, he's the blender. The guy has had the same lunch for the past 25 years because he doesn't want to change the way his palate tastes. So he has the same exact lunch every day at the exact same time. So he's able to keep to a standard.
That's a really interesting fact I don't think is widely known about Shinji.
He is an extraordinarily disciplined, talented man. And what he loves
What
about...
a boring lunch, I gotta tell you.
He likes it.
I love nachos. I hope it's something fun, not like he had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich 20 years ago and now he's stuck to it.
I think it's ramen.
Noodles?
Yes, noodles. But I do believe that he is such a student of his craft that he wants to keep it perfect. And there's only been 5 master blenders, so he's not going to screw this up. Where I think Fred loves that discipline in him and wants to understand more about that.
For his own craft.
Yeah, Fred is different. And now his son is very much into that blending and loves the idea of what Shinji does. That hasn't been Fred's thing. Fred has always tinkered with the distillation process, right? And the idea of the difference in proof at distillation or at bottling or temperature of fermenters or the yeast yield, that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff lights his world on fire. Where little Fred is has to know that, but he really is into the flavors. Excuse me, sorry. So Legent is the one that actually allowed us to get that knowledge shared between the two.
And is that going to be a wide release, or is it going to be limited like the book?
Wide release.
Yeah. So like the Toki?
Yes, like Toki.
It should. The idea is that we've, and I hope I'm speaking for this market, we've priced it accessibly so that people can experience the idea of Japanese blending with a bourbon whiskey.
What's the price?
It's going to be right in the mid-30s, 40, right in there. Yeah.
So
Basilish.
It's
the basil price range.
Sure.
But it is a different... I wish we would have brought a bottle, but you don't have it yet.
I know.
And I can only carry 1 bottle in my bag.
We're usually... this market as a whole is usually sees everything last. So, right in the... Like, I get so excited for Carchus every year.
Oh,
for Lefroy Carchus. And I remember last year we were expecting it in September or something. It showed up in December, and we were like, God, like they had already submitted the label approval for the next year's cartridge, so we're still waiting on the current year's. It's not y'all's fault. It's the way our stupid 3-tier, 4-tier system works.
System, yeah.
Yes.
I'm still learning.
Well, Legion will be here in the next probably what's today? Tuesday, Wednesday, about a week.
Oh,
yeah, it's coming soon to a theater near you.
If you can let me know what theater shows up first, I'd be
will.
happy to
AMC,
happy to talk about
AMC
it
40.
Happy to talk about it on the show here.
You can guess which theater it'll probably show up first.
Oh yeah. Big theater.
Big theater.
Big 800-pound gorilla theater. That's very emotional. So it's the booze.
Yes,
Chris,
of course.
So I didn't say who it was. So let's get to the Knob Creek. I'm excited.
All right.
Let's talk about this package redesign.
This is my favorite brand. This package design, obviously, is simplifying the label, making it easier to read, and calling out the small batch and the 100 proof.
I think the matte proof paper label is a nice step up. I think it's
nice.
something about it just is a clean, kind of a classic look, you know?
Yeah, I think they felt that the other look was somewhat dated.
Yeah.
I didn't, of course.
I mean, I can see what you're saying.
But this is cleaner. This is, I think, speaks more to the liquid. Because I think the last label, we allowed it to be understated and allowed it to be, come discover me.
Sure.
Where this is actually is appealing.
Yeah.
Someone may look at this and say, I really like this, versus the other one that almost dared you to like it. Yeah. You gonna like me or you not?
So this is not a gotcha question, but I'm simply curious. I know small batch is not regulated, but if I remember correctly, I remember reading. I think Booker's is a blend of 300-ish barrels, give or take, and Knob Creek's a small batch as well. Is that do we know how many barrels go into that?
I can't tell you how many barrels, but I would tell you that it is distilled at a lower proof. So there are Knob Creek barrels, and you can go down to the distillery and see those barrels.
Oh, no, I've definitely seen, like I said, we bought a bunch of them. They're
that's
fantastic.
Right. Well, you've had those, right.
So one thing we've talked about in this show particular about you guys is you guys are putting out, like, consistently hundreds of barrels a year that are 13, 14, 15-year-old Knob Creek barrels for $40. Like, it's a ridiculously
but it's not
good.
to a lot of people. I mean, honestly, it's only... In the big picture, it only goes to the single barrel program.
Sure, so. But just the fact that you guys do it, it's an indication that you guys have a lot of like this great.
We love what we do.
Yeah,
we don't have a lot of it. I'll be honest with you, we do not.
Did you just pour it in here?
I did pour it in there.
Oh, it smells incredible.
So this is my favorite.
Oh,
I mean, outside of Kathleen's batch, this is my favorite.
You know, I've never tasted it.
Knob Creek?
No, Kathleen's.
Oh well, we will be tasting that today. But this is whiskey.
That is spice.
The way it used to be, the way it was meant to be. This is true Kentucky bourbon. And so for me, this takes me to the Kentucky sunset. It takes me back to the early 90s when I had to go work at the distillery to learn how to make whiskey because Booker felt that it was important that I understood what went into the bottle.
I know this may seem like a dumb question, but you still live in Kentucky?
You did?
No. I'm asking you. Do you still live?
No. I live in Chicago.
Okay, yeah. Because I know you had mentioned the de-icing thing was a bit of a nightmare. But
that was coming out of Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a...
And now she's here with
quite
75
the hectic.
degrees.
Yeah.
But I gotta
How
tell
great
you,
does it feel right now?
I made him sit outside for lunch.
I mean, you can't breathe anything.
She goes, "Do you need a jacket?" I went, "No, I'm okay."
I was so happy to be outside. It was so freaking cold.
It's a hug. It's a warm hug.
It is a warm hug,
yeah.
And it makes me question why I'm in the Midwest, with the exception that it's central to everything, and I do travel a lot now.
Well, O'Hare is, a hub.
I got to tell you, I can go anywhere. I can be up in Toronto. I can be down in Florida. So it's a good thing. But let's go back to our Knob Creek. So Knob Creek is named for the childhood home of Abraham Lincoln. And I actually went to his home when it was still a museum in Knob Creek, Kentucky. That was in 93. And I really felt like this was the true roots of America. This is not for the bourbon virgin, right? This is whiskey that is the way it was at the turn of the century when it was 100 proof. This is maybe pre-turn of the century. This is straight from the barrel. That's when it would come down the Mississippi and end up in wherever, New Orleans, whatever.
It's a big punch in the face, yeah.
In a good way.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
No, it's all
I
love.
wouldn't say it's the punch in the face that it's the pleasant punch in the face.
It's the Chuck Norris of bourbons. I mean,
It
it's
is the
it's
Write that
Jesus,
down.
you keep coming up with good thing. Chuck Norris of bourbon. Okay. You got one for this one?
for Knob Creek.
This is John
I don't
Wayne of
know yet.
bourbons, right? This is
Wow.
the true man, the true West.
It's fantastic.
It's
Knob Creek is such a there's a thing with Diageo they do with their scotches. They call it their classic malts of Scotland.
Yeah.
This is classic bourbon. This is classic American bourbon right here.
This is, if I were to recommend any bourbon for, let's just say, an old fashioned, this is the whiskey that's got the right backbone, that you can add a bit of sugar, you can add a touch
It's a
of
great
water.
old fashioned.
Punches through.
Yeah.
It punches through.
I love
it's
it.
so
and,
good.
and you could put the fruit, or you don't have to have the fruit.
Right.
You could just do the lemon peel. It all depends on what you like. The other one that I wanted you to taste
Okay.
is the Knob Creek Rye.
Okay.
Now, it is 100 proof, but it's so different. I
That
just
sounds
wanted
great.
you to
100 proof's
experience
not bad.
it.
I think you think that I'm like all about the high proof.
No, I know the high proof, believe me.
100 proof's
I
a
go out and
great
talk with bartenders, and they need a higher proof whiskey
For
to
cocktails.
stand up to today's
to
cocktails.
punch through. Yeah.
To
yeah.
punch through,
Yeah,
exactly
right.
right.
And so I 100% agree with you. I just love this rye, but it is very different from Knob Creek base. And so
Totally.
I think it can be very different to some who are used to that sweet.
Can I pour this in there?
Yeah. Can I?
No, but he's got to finish his first.
I'm about to finish mine. No, go ahead. You could dump that.
Yeah, so I'm just going to
She's in
dump
my glass.
I'm not going to drink mine.
So there was speculation a couple years ago when Kentucky Owl Rye Batch 1 came out that it was Beam. It was Beam Rye.
Kentucky what?
Kentucky Owl Batch 1?
Okay.
Kentucky Owl Rye Batch 1.
Yeah. Okay.
So like 2 years ago, Kentucky Owl came out with a rye.
Mm-hmm.
It's 13 years old.
Okay.
Everybody was saying it might have been 11 years old.
Okay.
Everyone was saying that it's Beam. Beam was vehemently denying it. But then I had a discussion with our dear friend Adam Harris, great guy.
Mm-hmm.
And Adam goes, there's one particular scenario in which it could be Beam. And that was, 10 years ago, nobody was drinking the stuff. And it got sold off to brokers. And the brokers have been sitting on it for X amount of years. It finally gets to the point that it's 11 years old. You know what I mean? And by that point, there's no way to know.
In the old times, we distilled for a lot of people. And we would distill based on their specifications. So it may have come from us, but it may not have been our recipe. So I don't want to pretend to own their recipe.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying? I would say that
You get that bourbon in your
I think
hands.
even at one point, Pappy Van Winkle, we were holding their whiskey for them. And always, whenever I see Pappy, I'm like, that may be Jim Beam. Just 21 years old.
Yeah.
Which is why.
What's the oldest thing that you guys have distilled? I know there was some 16 in the 30-year-old batch.
Sure.
We had in the Distiller's Masterpiece at the turn of the century in 2000, 2001, we had an 18-year-old port finish and then a 20-year-old sherry finish. But those were super limited. We did them just for the turn of the century. It was for our CEO at the time, Barry Barish. And I have one bottle in my basement because I did those. And
What was it called?
Distiller's Masterpiece. It was the
Masterpiece.
original Distiller's Masterpiece.
Sure.
You have one? Oh, you hold on to that. I
I
had
never
no
opened
idea
it.
what an investment spirits are.
Oh, dude.
Holy cow.
Yeah, or
I've
how
got
much
stuff in
Facebook
my
would play a
basement.
role in that.
I'm like, I've got Jacob's Well. Remember Jacob's
Oh
Well?
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Jacob's Well.
That
sure
was
did.
a good
That's
whiskey.
still going for some
I know,
serious
and I
bucks.
still have some bottles in my basement because that was another one of mine. That
How many bottles do you have at your house?
I have
If you had
about
to
6. Oh, of that?
No.
Oh.
Total amount of bottles in
I
your
got
house.
a lot of bottles in my
500?
house. No, I don't have 500. I have teenagers. Well, not anymore. I have one 18-year-old. My son, my older one, he's now 23 when he was in high school, drank my Booker's 10th anniversary
Oh, my God.
with his friends in my basement.
And mixed it with Coke or
I was
something.
going to say with
I
Coke
cried.
or Pepsi or something.
I cried. Just for the 4 children you have, or 3,
Yeah.
know that this is coming.
So I have a theory about that, but you've worked in the industry long enough that you might automatically disprove my theory.
What?
So I grew up in a very Pentecostal household,
Oh.
super religious,
Yeah.
and not just. Well, actually, I never rebelled. My mom was very reasonable. she was also the black sheep in her family because she was not super religious.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
my mom was very normal, very level-headed.
Love it.
And I loved it. I felt like I had a very level
Yeah.
head. My cousins, my other family, all like super religious,
Yeah.
very anti everything. And of course, when they turn 18, 19, 20, there's a lot of drinking and partying and like
hard,
just a crazy opposite, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because of the last few years and everything with the Whiskey Social and the show, and our kids, we have about 600 bottles at the house, but it's gotten to the point where I have a Booker shelf. And that's I didn't just make that
So you
up.
have the different batches.
Yeah, so I've got a shelf on top of our bookshelf. It's out in the open. There's no lock or anything on it, but there's 15 different, or there's probably 12 different Bookers. I've got some backups in the storage,
Right.
Wow.
but they're around it so much they don't even notice it anymore.
And
it's
they
like
also
food or anything
know
else.
it's special to you. And I think at the time, my kids did not know it was special to me. It was in a cabinet in the basement by my pictures because I was
Sure.
saving it.
Sure.
And
Well, we're cutting this part out too, right?
yes, we
Okay,
are.
so let's
move back. Let's suck
Talk
it back
about that
over.
after.
Suck
Yeah.
it back over. Okay.
But let me write that down too. But, I think that if you grow up around it for the most part, I think it's possible.
Yeah.
To normalize things in a reasonable way,
A healthy way.
that they don't think. My sons too, and besides popping me in the mouth, he doesn't. His focus, my son's whole life right now is two things. He loves sticks, right? We've got a Harry Potter one that he loves to point at people, and when he got his first pop gun, his little, like, we didn't give him the pop part, but just the gun thing. He loves to, that's his whole life. He doesn't give a crap about my Booker's collection or whatever.
But I grew up my mom's European, from Europe, and I've had alcohol around me my whole life when I was a little kid, and now I have a 26-year-old, 24-year-old, 22-year-old. And I am sure they have got in the liquor cabinet one time or another. I can't prove it.
Sure.
No, they've never come out and told me, not yet.
Sure.
But it's not been a big deal because they've been around their whole life. What's that, Dad?
You know what that is?
Try it.
There's this the way Europeans look at alcohol is so different than Americans.
Oh, absolutely.
That I think is what we should be looking at it in that way. We were actually, it's in Kentucky. There's a big push in Kentucky right now to change the drinking culture. And when you go to all these different known bourbon bars in Kentucky or places, even a few distilleries, there's signs. There's this one famous sign that's at all these locations that just talk about changing the drinking culture. It doesn't have to be a party. It doesn't have to be to get drunk. This tastes amazing. It's a treat. It's a flavor experience. It's like a food
group.
It's a food group.
It's a food group.
And
I like that.
That's what it is.
I think if, as Americans, if we weren't in such a rush to automatically demonize things and cause those backlash, that reversion to rebel.
Right.
If you normalize things and teach people not everything's a big deal, like just moderation in everything.
Absolutely.
Moderation in
with
fast
everything.
food, moderation, and our kids don't eat fast food. I mean, I take that back. Chick-fil-A is a godsend, but it's an interesting thing. So I don't remember how we got on the subject, but you mentioning you have all these little gyms in your basement. I'm like, I bet you got a little mini museum down there. That's probably
I've got some good stuff, and it just I look at it, and once in a while I have a bottle of cider that Booker made in I think 1998.
Whoa.
That he would make at the Booker Note plant.
Sure.
Because he would alter the Booker Note plant to do this once a year. And it's the coolest thing. And someday I want to open it, but I know I can't. Because I'll lose anything that's special, and it won't last.
Well, how old are your kids?
23 and 18.
So wait for a wedding.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, so I've got a bottle from Prohibition, a medicinal bottle, that I'm saving for when each kid hits 21.
That's cool.
Just a reason
that.
to kind of introduce them and I'm thinking if their first legal drink of alcohol, hopefully their first drink ever alcohol is something special and a piece of history, that it might start their journey as adults in a different way. That's my thought.
I love that.
Whereas me, if any of you guys are local to Houston, there was this place called the Chantilly Room, which is just an old dive. Everything smells like cigarettes. And that was my 21s. I didn't like that. And it's something I refuse to go back to. So I think you could introduce kids to little gems and pieces of, I mean, brandy. I mean, he made brandy in 20 years ago. That's got to be special, right?
It's going to be incredible when it happens. And I think that leads us to another piece when we think about brands like Booker's. The thing that Booker tried to teach me when I first started, and I was young, I was out of college, was to understand the process behind it, understand the history of what you're talking about, understand the people. I mean, he made me stand on the floor. There were no computers, and wait for the temperature to get to a certain level on the cooker to drop rye, because he wanted me to understand what it took, that it wasn't a mechanical thing, that
it wasn't
there is art
push of
to
a
it.
button. Yeah.
And so I think that if we help people understand that this is more of an art, this is part of our history, our collective history, they'll see it as less a high-proof, low-proof product, and they'll see it as a classic image of our past or what our future is. And so that's when I taste Booker's, I think about that. I think about the smells that we get when you're, as we were talking about,
in the warehouse,
when you're driving up, it's
cooking
the
room,
look. It's all look when you look down the hills or when you look up at the knobs in Kentucky. That's what's special about it. And if we could just teach people that, if we can just get them away from the concept of it's high proof, it means this.
See, I think an argument could also be made, and this isn't to dog on cocktail makers. Obviously, we know that a lot of brands, you're built in a bar, the cocktail scene, and the importance of the cocktail scene. I get that.
Yeah.
But I kind of look at drinking whiskey the way that I think most people should learn how to drive, and that's on stick, right? So I think when my kids are old enough to drive, I think they should learn to drive stick shift first.
Yes.
And I think they should be brought up experimenting and drinking with straight, because you're sipping it, you're not shooting it. It's a much slower process. This one little half-ounce pour could last me a good 15 minutes.
Right.
You know what I mean? With cocktails, you kind of forget sometimes. It just doesn't always punch through. A lot of times, you're just getting a lot of sugar flavors, right? And then all of a sudden, you're like, crap, I had 3, I'm done.
Yeah.
So I think there's nothing wrong with cocktails. I love a good cocktail. But I think what I really, in my mind, as a, coming up as a younger drinker, I'm not that young. I'm 31. I'm old, but but the idea of the drinking culture in America is hundreds of years old.
Yes.
And all the bad stuff, and I think we are moving towards a more positive drinking culture. I think the mentality around alcohol is a lot more reverent than it used to be.
I agree.
And I think it's a good thing.
It's a knowledgeable base. Even young people understand, the Booker's is straight from the barrel. What we still can't get people to understand is that it's not meant to be sip straight with Booker's. I mean, today we're going to taste 127.4 proof.
Oh, I'm so excited.
I know, it's great. But Booker, the whole thing I always wanted to explain to people is that he made this so that no one would tell him the proof to drink his whiskey. He would choose the proof that he'd drink his whiskey.
I've made that argument.
And
I could choose my own.
Yeah, I don't want somebody to tell me. Right now, we're telling you, you drink this at 80 proof. You drink this at 100 proof.
You don't have a choice, yeah.
This one, you've never had water touch it. So when it goes in the glass, it is as if it came straight out of the barrel. And there's nothing else like it. And I'm going to let you just nose that while we talk here.
Okay.
So this is Kathleen's batch, and it's 6 years, 3 months. And we selected it out of, as you know, you've got your Booker's collection at home, right?
Yep.
So everybody's got a different taste. Tommy's batch from the year before, Tommy Krumer was our distillery manager. He had a different taste that he liked. Me, I knew what I liked, and it was all those flavors that I remembered from mid-1900s. No, 1990s, that I remembered that was the true smell of bourbon, that caramel, the vanilla. And it was the 5th and 6th floor level. Out of a 9-floor rack house, it's the majority that comes from that center cut, where the temperature and humidity are perfect to create a great taste. So I put my nose in the glass. That is beautiful. for me, it's beautiful. Now, obviously, I may be a bit biased.
Yeah, it's your batch. How did that come about?
It was...
I mean, you and we haven't talked about this yet, but you're a Bourbon Hall of Famer, right?
I am.
Was it 2015?
2015.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to have that honor. And it was working 15 years with the Beam family and continuing with brand education. So I worked brand education around the world. And so it was very, very exciting from a girl from Chicago, a child of immigrants, being accepted into this very small world of Kentucky distillers. So it was wonderful.
How many people are in the Bourbon Hall of Fame?
I don't know, but I think I was like the fifth woman.
Yeah, not
There wasn't
many.
a lot. I was the second woman from Beam. The first was Margie Samuels.
Margie.
Who is Bill Samuels' mother. You've met Bill, obviously. He's been on your show.
Yeah. She knew that.
I did know Bill was on your show because Bill is the cat's pajamas.
Oh man, he's a talker. I loved it.
He's got the stories. My God, every time I hear he talks, he's got a new story,
He's
and
awesome.
I love that.
He's
Yeah.
awesome.
But I just called him because we had International Women's Day, and I did an event featuring Margie Samuels, and I called him to say, I need you to tell me about your mom. Tell me more about what she was like, and what she did that was great, what she did that wasn't so great. Tell me what she's like as a human being. And he must have gone on for a half hour about his mother, and it was wonderful because she was both perfect and flawed. She was.
Aren't we all?
Yes, she would create this great package and the lettering on the package and the dipping and all that kind of stuff. But she was such a perfectionist, nothing was ever good enough. So she could not enjoy it to the level that she should have enjoyed it. And so I just think that there's so much of that we all have in our lives. And I just love to hear that in as much as she's an icon in this industry, she's like the rest of us. And there are pieces of us that will never be perfect. And I have so much respect for what she was able to achieve. She had a degree. She graduated with a degree in chemistry in 1933. If you could believe that. She started in 1933. Yeah,
chemist.
When you were going to be a nurse or a teacher. That was
Just after Prohibition, too.
Secretary.
Or a secretary.
Yeah, right.
Well, a secretary was even, but the fact was the market crashed and she went to college for chemistry. Wow. She was a kick-ass lady. I just think the world of her. So I'm hoping I channel her as we talk about this bourbon because she really loved her whiskey. She loved her whiskey with ginger ale. Now, what Booker always wanted to do was create a whiskey that you choose how you drink it. And so he would drink his whiskey straight, of course, because he liked straight whiskey. But at lunchtime, he'd do 2 ounces of Booker's to 4 ounces of water. Because he'd say, why would you flavor your water with tea leaves if you can flavor it with bourbon? Which I thought was always a good argument.
Can I see the bottle there?
Yes, you can.
I brought a bottle for you to sign, but didn't bring anything you to sign with. Do you have a marker?
I have one in my car.
Yeah, I've got
If you get my backpack.
Yeah, I got one in my car, too.
We'll figure it out.
I always carry one with me. But this, do you like that? I'm just curious to
do,
hear,
yeah.
as a person who drinks the very best whiskeys.
There's been a couple of Booker's batches I wasn't blown away by. The first one that ever hooked me was No Secret.
Oh.
That one was, and that was the roundtable batch that Adam participated in on.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't know that at the time. I just loved it. And that was my first oh my gosh, this is blowing me away. And so I have like a case of that.
Oh, you do.
And I've picked them up every center cut.
Oh yeah, center cut.
Blue Nights batch.
Blue Nights is good.
Yeah.
Blue Nights is good. Front porch. Did you try front porch?
I think I have a front porch. And what was the one with the oven on it?
Oven Buster.
Yeah, but I haven't opened them. They look so good on the shelf, though. You're torn between. Listen, I'm not a collector. I'm a drinker.
No, I know.
But while you're waiting to get to that, it's sitting up there and it's looking real damn good.
I'm holding a lot of them we have a bar at the office, and I'm holding a lot of them there because I do believe there's going to come a time when we want to do a flight tasting. And when Tommy selected his batch, he had been making whiskey for 30 years, so his palate was very different than mine. Mine was a beautiful vision of what I thought bourbon was, and it came from aromas.
Sure.
His comes from working at the distillery, and it's intense.
Aromas are where I'm locked in at. I can't.
Yeah.
If something's got a great nose on it, I can't walk away from it. It's so perfect.
I'm going to add some water to this because
Is this the fourth segment?
Yes, this is.
Oh wow, that flew by.
Is it bad?
It's the end of the show.
We're done?
Yeah, we got 2 minutes left.
2 minutes. Okay, we better make it count.
Yeah.
What you tell me what you want to cover.
Shots. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Boom.
I think I've been doing those already.
What's the price point on the rye?
This rye?
Yeah.
Boy, you're going to catch me on the spot
36.
here.
Didn't we see
yeah,
that today?
We see?
It's all with
36.
Yeah, 35 for the 40.
Oh,
I'm gonna call it
35.
that. It's
Okay.
35 to 40, depending on where you're going.
Great price point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Listen, I've been a big supporter of you guys. I'd love to see you take some of your notes and turn them into a next batch. I saw Bedside Bottle is a great name for
I
a
love
Booker's
the
release.
bedside bottle. I think that is
Chantilly
a great idea.
Room is another great. There's a lot of great new
The
Booker's
Chuck
batches. that can
Norris
come-
of bourbon.
Chuck Norris.
I'm telling you. Well, when we do the bedside bottle, you'll have to come to the
Well,
round table.
He's here in Texas, right? Chuck Norris he lives here.
He lives here, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to get us approved on that one.
Heck yeah,
Yeah.
man.
I don't think he'll.
Listen. So what
Would that be awesome?
It would be it'd be a lot of fun.
That'd be
And he's not a
hilarious.
drinker though. That's the
No,
problem.
yeah, he might have a problem
He's
with that.
very religious.
I think bedside bottle is
Is a
where
great
it's at,
name.
baby.
Bringing
Yeah.
in the spirits. I mean,
So
come on, it's
what-
religious.
We've got a couple minutes left. I
Yeah.
want to ask you specifically the process for these roundtables. I know
Yes.
we probably should have asked this about a segment and a half ago,
No
but
worries.
we were enjoying each other.
That's right.
So, what's the process for these tables? Who is included in the roundtables? Who gets selected for the roundtables? What was your process for yours? You got some input, and they said, "Hey, we want to do a batch based off of you," and you said, "Shit, yeah, let's do it."
Rock on.
Yeah.
I got a call from Fred in December, and he said, Kathleen, how would you like to have the first batch of 2018 named for you? And, of course, after I was done screaming, I said, you okay? Here.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Water?
Same thing. Down the wrong pipe. It's okay. Did you cry? You get
Of course
emotional
I
about it?
cried. I was like a baby, but I'm not going to say that. I cried on the phone, then I cried to my mom, and then I cried to my boys. It is something, it's like the Bourbon Hall of Fame where it's a validation of your life's work, and
Sure.
there's nothing.
You haven't been asking for it, but it's nice that it's acknowledged.
Oh my God, it is godsend. So I said absolutely, and we got together in January of the year, and he gave me 3 samples. And I said, what do you like? And he goes, I'm not telling you what I like. You need to decide what you like. So I took it home, and I sat with it in my jammies in my living room, and I laid the 3 out, and I just swirled and sniffed, and I decided what I liked. And then we had the round table. Now, the round tables, in the case of Kathleen's batch, it was not my choice. But it was great. They brought in people from the media, and it was folks that people like Adam know.
Had Fred Minnick ever participated in any of the roundtables?
I believe Fred has, yes.
Yeah. Well, what an honor.
He wasn't mine, but Paul Packold was on my panel, and I've worked with Paul since the mid-'90s because he did tours with us.
Well, I'm
with Booker.
technically a member of the media, so if there's
you
if there's
are.
a roundtable, I'll fly to Kentucky.
when
I'm there
there's
3 times a year.
When the bedside bottle comes out,
And Chuck Norris?
and Chuck, well, I doubt that Chuck Norris will ever happen, but bedside bottle is certainly an opportunity. So, when I went to when we did the tasting, we had everybody select, and oddly enough, we did a blind voting, and they selected the same one I selected.
Oh, nice.
Which was lucky, and it was not
Even more validation.
fixed at all.
Yeah, that's
'cause
secret validation.
That was super validation. I was so scared it was not going to be the one I picked because my heart was set on that one. Not that the other 2 were bad, but I know what you're saying when there's
Sure.
one that just doesn't. You know when it's the right one, and when you were going through your barrel selection.
Yeah.
When you smell it, you're like,
This is it.
this is it. And they found the same thing. There was one other sample that was very good. I selected sample B. Most people selected B. There was some votes for C, and C was good. And I did keep a bottle of C, just so I have it.
That's the stuff I like. I like those little.
Yeah.
This wasn't selected for anything. It's just a little time capsule in a moment. It's just a little.
This could have been,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it wasn't.
What if? It's the what if bottle.
Yeah. And that what if bottle didn't happen, but this did. And
You happy with it?
the little hills there are the hills and valleys of our lives, because we all have hills and we all have valleys, and that represents my 28 years at Beam, where it is a journey, and it
That's
was
awesome.
special. So I'm glad you like it.
Oh, I'm a fan. It's very good.
Please have more.
That's one thing. Absolutely. It's one thing I love about you guys are showcasing that 6-year-old bourbon can be damn good.
Oh, from my mouth to
can
God's
be.
ears. Well, it all depends on where you pull it from. It really comes down to that. And I believe the C was an older product, but it didn't have the nose.
Older doesn't make it better.
Nope.
Definitely
And
does not make it better. A lot of people think older is better.
it wasn't until I did
it
it blind that I understood that it had to do, and Fred tried to explain this to me, there's so many different variations that affect the end product that you can't say it's one thing. It is not just age. It is not just proof. It is not just the cereal grain you're
It's
using.
everything, yeah.
It's everything.
It's a combination.
So
They're all chefs. They're all master chefs.
there's a million right answers, but
Yeah.
this was the right answer for me.
A cake is not a cake without all the ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my Lord.
Man, I'm
Now
on a
I'm
roll
going to have
today,
to write
guys.
that again.
Cake is a cake.
Cake is
Not
a cake. Great name for a bottle. Cake is a cake. And with that, we've got to go. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so
Kathleen
much. Thank you.
DiBenedetto.
Thanks
Steve
for having
Stanley.
me.
Thank you guys. Cheers.
Appreciate it.
Cheers to you.